Welcome to the first panel session today on Israel's stand in the Middle East after the signature of the Abrahamic peace treaties with the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Bahrain. My name is Eldad Beck, Europe correspondent of the daily Israel Hayom, and one of the first Israeli journalists to have traveled in the Arab world in countries which didn't and still don't have relations with Israel. I will be moderating this debate, if it's going to be a debate, maybe just a dialogue. Allow me to introduce the participants in the panels. From Abu Dhabi, we have Dr. Naajath Saeed, Saudi and American researcher, columnist and commentator writing on media, politics, and women's rights. From Dubai, Mrs. Sukaina El-Mashekhi, Saudi TV moderator, columnist, and a prominent voice on women's rights in the Gulf region. In July 2018, she wrote a very courageous article in the Saudi newspaper Al-Yom, calling to recognize Israel. From Manama in Bahrain, Amg'ad, British Arab researcher and commentator, head of the Gulf office of the British Middle East Center for Studies and Research, a prominent voice for the normalization between the Arab world and Israel. From Tel Aviv, we have Professor Eyal Zisser, the Vice Rector of Tel Aviv University and the holder of the Yona and Dina Ettinger Chair in Contemporary History of the Middle East, and last but not least, Boaz Bismuth, editor-in-chief of Israel Hayom, who among the many things that he has done in his life was the former Israeli ambassador to Mauritania. Translator to and from Arabic is Tzachi Fenton from Elkanah. The first question to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to what extent are the Abrahamic treaties a game changer in the acceptance of Israel in the Middle East? Who would like to take it first? So
maybe if you allow me to start, Eldad, I will start maybe with a story. You mentioned that I was ambassador in Mauritania. And that's a very good way of starting, I think, those Abraham Accord. And why? Because, I mean, I know the importance of the relationship, the official and formal relationship between an Arabic country or between the Arab world and Israel. Now, I remember very well, I mean, the ambassador that I was, that sometimes I was not the, I would say that I was treated sometimes even by officials as the mistress, meaning you would see me at night. You wouldn't see me usually at events, I mean, with other ambassadors. For example, if there was a new movie that came to town and you'll have like a cultural event, then the Israeli ambassador would not be always invited because it might offend other ambassadors from the Arab world. And why this Abraham Accord is so important? Because I do remember one day in 2005, two of my embassy who had foreign passport were called by Jerusalem and were sent to the Emirates because we used to have an office over there, but it was not official as everybody knows today, because today that's not a secret anymore. And for me, why is this accord so important? Because what we used to do sometimes, discreetly, you can do it at last openly. And this is a huge change. Another thing, if you want, you know, you and me, Eldad, I mean, we remember, the peace treaty with Egypt. We remember the peace treaty with Jordan. We remember how it was accepted or not accepted by public opinion. I even remember in 1993, after the Oslo agreement with the Palestinians, I was sent by my newspaper to the Palestinian camps, Al-Husseini in Jordan. And I remember the hostility towards those agreements. And now what do you see? You see in the Emirates and you see our new friends in Bahrain being as happy as we are by this all new or open friendship that we have. So for me, maybe one of the biggest changes, because we'll speak later on about strategy, we'll speak about many things, but it's really, you can feel that this is really peace, that it's something that you do between people and not between only governments. Also peace that you do from up, but especially also from downwards. And this is for me a big, big change in all the philosophy of peace in the Middle East.
Let's try and see it now from the Arab side. Any of the Arab participants, maybe Dr. Naajath Saeed?
I agree with most of what has been mentioned, almost all of what has been mentioned, and I will add something. I believe the main changes that happened through these peace treaties, that it is considered as throwing a stone in a static pond. We know all that this conflict has been for ages without a valid solution. But now with this kind of peace treaty is different. I believe it is different from two perspectives. First of all, the Arab Gulf states are quite different in their mentality compared to the other Arabs. First of all, they are pragmatic, and they are free from other ideologies, both the leaders and majority of the people. So they're going to be thinking more pragmatically in how they can work out these kind of peace treaties. This is number one. And number two, they will be setting an example of how peace treaty is an example to the others. Like the peace treaties that happened in Egypt and Jordan were mainly government to government. It wasn't people to people, so it was called peace. I consider it more as no war peace. So with this one, it's not truly a peace. It's like no war treaties. This is how I consider it. But with this kind of peace treaty is more war peace because it's more people to people. And I can see already the outcome, the positive outcome, especially through the UAE Israeli Business Council. I can see already Israeli visitors are visiting with warm welcoming from Emiratis, and they're dealing with business. Let's talk about politics. So the politics here is more dealt with the government, and the people are dealing with business. And this is something new to the region. And from that point, I see it very, very positive.
Amjad, peace, normalization, how would you call what is happening right now?
I would call it a peace and a game changer, but let me start with a Jewish quote that says in Hebrew, Lo mashineka amtit kadim bet yot hai kashachin nacha oster. I know I didn't say it very right, but it means it doesn't matter how slowly you go, as long as you do not stop. And hopefully this train of peace and prosperity does not stop right now because of this. I mean, it's a game changer, but because of a historical deception and a mistake in which communists and socialists and religious extremists took part in, and there was a kind of inaccurate impression of a state of Israel was created, which led to its failure to be accepted in the Arab region. And I'm sure the ambassador can confirm that later on. But with the development of the events and the let's call it the biosphere of knowledge, the Arabs were dividing right now into three types. Let's say the type which is the Gulf type, which has suffered from the terrorism of the Palestinian terrorist movement, such as Abu Nidal organization, ANO, which was part of the PLO, which carried attacks on Saudi flights in 1974, and Bahrain 771 flights, Gulf Air flight, and assassinated the UAE's ambassador in France in 1984 and killed the Kuwaiti diplomat in 1982 in India, and so on. So these countries with their people and their leadership who stood for years with the people of Palestine and sent billions of financial assets to build cities, schools, mosques, hospitals, you call it whatever, in all these areas where Palestinians live. But in return, they had a denial, insult, or almost let's call it a hostility from some of the Palestinians. With the PLO right now, this is a game changer, especially when we look at the PLO right now and all the corruption and the missionaries that they have in it. And the recent move that the PLO did, lining up with Erdogan's regime, which occupies the Western Libya and the Northern Syria and commits crimes against the Kurds and the Armenians before, and with Mahmoud Abbas being meeting the Iranian militias leaders in Gaza, Hamas and so on, it became clear to everyone that the right solution right now is to go for peace and to get any rights. And that the people of Palestine right now are the hostage of criminals and the group of gangs who wants money, not peace. They don't want a homeland. They don't want a land. They just want a kind of like money, and that's about it. So the Gulf type, that type of understanding, while the second type of the Arabs are the countries which suffered from the anti-terrorism, anti-Israel slogans. And now we're talking about the regimes such as the ones in Syria. People didn't get anything in Syria apart from, as a result of that, apart from destruction and poverty and so on. Even the Palestinian gangs participated in killing the Syrian people in the Syrian civil war, the recent one. And the Lebanese who suffered from the Palestinian gangs in the Damo massacre in 1976 and so on, and the Iraqi people who suffered from Saddam just putting slogans against Israel, and they didn't get nothing as a result apart from poverty. So that type, now we have the type of the Gulf who understands that, and the type which suffered from the whole being against Israel, and the other type which understands that type understands war will not bring the type that we have. I think that they are the third type, which are the time-worn generation, let's say the old generation, the Orthodoxians. They are still being deceived. Let's hope for them to change and fade out.
Sukaina, do you see what has happened, these treaties, as a fundamental change toward Israel?
نعم، هنالك تغير في دعني أقول في نمو القبول الإسرائيلي عربيا. توقيع اتفاق أبراهام ليس بالضرورة شيء كان على بياض بالنسبة لإسرائيل، لكن يعني هنالك فرق بين التطبيع على المستوى الشعبي وبين توقيع اتفاقيات سلام على المستوى السياسي. يعني سابقا وقعت مصر وأيضا الأردن اتفاقيتي سلام، ولكن لم يكن هنالك اختراق سلمي شعبي، يعني بقيت الشعوب بعيدة عن بعضها البعض. حاليا دعني أقول في التوجه الخليجي في هذه المرحلة أجد بأن هنالك قبول شعبي يعني آخذ بالتنامي والتزايد في الشارع الخليجي، وهذا تعتبر شيء جديد على مجتمعاتنا العربية، ربما لأن طبيعة المجتمعات الخليجية تختلف، أو ربما لأن بعد دول الخليج أيضا يعني بعيدة عن إسرائيل، وربما لأننا أيضا لم نخوض أي حروب سابقة مع إسرائيل. لذلك أنا أجد بأن هنالك علاقة، هنالك قبول. أيضا بالنسبة إلى حركة القوميون العرب، نعم ما زال لها بقايا رغم أنها انحلت في سنة 70، ولكن ما زال هنالك بقايا من القوميون، ولكن ليسوا بنسبة كبيرة كالسابق. يعني لو بدأت مثلا مرحلة السلام مع إسرائيل قبل سنوات في فترة وجود مثلا جماعة الإخوان المسلمين في مصر وغيرها من دول، سنجد بأن هنالك معارضة كبيرة من الشارع الخليجي. ولكن هذا توقيت الاتفاقيات التي تمت بين البحرين وأيضا بين الإمارات كان التوقيت الحقيقي لهذه الاتفاقيات. الشارع الخليجي بدأ دعني أقول بأنه يبتعد كثيراً عن مناخ جماعة الإسلام السياسي، وأيضاً الحركات الإصلاحية التي قامت بها الخليج جعلت هنالك يعني مناخ جيد يتقبل فيه الشارع الخليجي لأي اتفاقيات سلام.
Professor Zisa, I would like to start with a point that was brought up by Sukaina, which is the Qubul al-Shabi, the popular acceptance of Israel and of these agreements. We have the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies based in Doha, in Qatar, which published a poll, a very large poll with 30,000 people in 13 different Arab countries, that found that actually 88% of the Arabs are against recognition of the state of Israel. To what extent is such a poll, especially knowing that it's coming from Qatar, is reliable?
Well, I don't think it is reliable. Coming back to the agreements, I think it's a major breakthrough because the conventional wisdom, it's an earthquake in the sense that we shouldn't have been surprised. I mean, it was a slow process. We saw it coming, and still the conventional wisdom was that the Palestinians have a veto power, the Arab Street will refuse it, the Gulf states are not as important and central in the Arab world, and they will always look to Syria and Egypt. And what happened was that the door was open, and suddenly we look around and realized that the Palestinians are not as important, that the Gulf state became central. I mean, when nowadays you speak about the center of the Arab world, it's not anymore Cairo like it was in the 50s or 60s. People look at the Gulf. This is the center, not Damascus, and so on and so forth. Now, as to the Arab street, I mean, we knew it all before that whenever an Egyptian intellectual or men in the street want to demonstrate against the regime because of, you know, his resentment and his domestic problems, he can't, of course, get to the street and shout against the ruler. So he used the anti-Israeli slogans. I mean, it's not that really people in the Arab world care or thought committed or thought, you know, that they should sacrifice themselves. It was a pretext. It was a tool. And I think that now people realize that it's not anymore the case. And as you rightly mentioned, especially when it comes from a country like Qatar, which was the first to normalize relations with Israel already back in the early 90s, but, well, they have to survive, you know, between the Iranians and Erdogan, and so they choose the radical, the evil side of the map.
Now, the special attitude of the Gulf countries, does it have to do only with the fact that they recognize that Israelis and Emiratis have Iran as the main enemy, or does it also have to do with some lessons that were taught by the failed Arab Spring and by the radicalism that we saw coming up from this movement? Who would go first on this question? Amjad?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I have a different perspective when it comes to the first thing. When it comes to the what we spoke about, the Azmi Bashar. Azmi Bashar is, we all know about this guy, how corrupted he is, and he's led by the Qatari regime and sponsored by those. And I mean, the same institution, his center, which said that there is no much popularity or support for the peace treaty. The same institution came up with the fact that Tripoli in Libya, West Libya, it's a safe haven for economy and advanced economy. While we know Tripoli suffers from poverty and struggles from militias and so on, but obviously that center only did that because the extremist Islamic militias who are supported by the Qatari regime, they are the allies of Doha, and that's why the center only supports that, and that's about it. So, but when it comes to Iran and the outcome of the Arab Spring and having Iran as one of the enemies of the Arab world, I say, let's be honest. Many crimes and massacres in the world occurred because people were let to speak. They're very late to speak about the truth, or some knew the wound and decided to place a plaster of silence over it, or let's call it for the sake of the public interest. And because of the public numbing silence, and countries delayed to move against Hitler, and we witnessed the evilest Holocaust and the genocide against the Jews. Now, the same thing right now the Iranians are doing. The Nazi of the Middle East right now are the Iranians, the Nazis of the Middle East, and the haters of the Arabs, and the ones who are today suffering under the Iranian regime, from unlawful arrest to kidnapping to execution, exactly what the Jews suffered from Germany, are the people of the Arab people, even inside Iran. Today, the Arab people of Ahwaz, which is a country has been occupied by Iran since 1925, and there are more than 11 million Arabs, and are going through what the Jew went through in the era of the Nazis. Iran today is no different than the Nazis, than the Nazi Germany, with its racist and practice and ethnic cleansing towards the people, the Arab people, or the Ahwazi people, the 90% where the oil exists. When when we see all the peace and prosperity and eventually reaching peace for the Palestinians and supporting even their rights to reach a fair deal with Israel, who doesn't like that? I tell you who, all the radicals and the members of the Iranian regime who are the Nazis of the Middle East, the Iranian who have a problem with the Arab countries. They are the fascists, the racists towards all kind of the Arab part, apart from their militias, obviously. Since the 1970s, the Iranian have occupied 3 of the UAE islands. They have killed more than 4 million of the Arab during the whole wars with the Arab people. In Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, supported the terrorist attack. They supported all terrorist attack in Saudi Arabia, in Yemen, in Bahrain, in the whole Gulf state, recently even in Kuwait, when they supported the whole Hezbollah's group in Kuwait and so on. So, I mean, imagine Iran had the nuclear. Israel did not blast explosion near the Kaaba, and they did not target the Mecca. They did not throw the missiles there. Israel did not manufacture militias that killed the Iraqi people or Yemen, or did not even swing a picture of Netanyahu in southern Lebanon. Iran did all that. Iran is occupying, Iran is killing all these people. So today, if there is an enemy of the Arab people and the Israeli and the humanity, it's Iran. And if the Palestinians, no, yes, go ahead.
Let me go to Naajath. Is it only the Iranian threat, or is it also the recognition, which was quite visible during the Arab Spring, that the different Arab populations in the Arab world actually understood for the first time that their daily problem is not the Arab-Israeli conflict, that they have other problems, and if they want to solve these problems, they would rather have normalization with Israel?
Before I answer this question, Albert, I want to go for the statistics, the one that you just mentioned, because unfortunately these days, most of the statistics are politicized. And we can see that even in the US election, we saw that. Let me give you, just to show you how much these numbers are so much politicized. So the numbers that the Qatari Foundation said that 88% of the Arabs are against recognition of Israel. If I compared these numbers to the studies that have been conducted by Trends, which is a think tank that is based in Abu Dhabi, it's completely the opposite. The study says that 80% of the Arab world do agree with the peace treaty. Okay, and the survey was done in both Arabs in the Arab countries and also Arabs based in Western countries. Okay, 81% is a big percentage. It's not only that. The study also said that 45% agree strongly that peace agreements with Israel can contribute to achieving peace and stability in the whole Middle East. So they're not only pro the peace treaty, they see positive outcome of it. And 39% strongly agree that peace agreements with Israel can contribute to countering terrorism. Okay, and 41% agree strongly that peace agreements with Israel can contribute to economic and social development. And 33% strongly agree that peace agreements with Israel can contribute to finding a comprehensive and just solution to the Palestinians themselves. So before we go, like now even when we see numbers, we should be watching where are these numbers are coming from, because a lot are playing with these numbers or go and send the survey to certain kind of people who are against it. Okay, who have already those extremist ideologies, who are dominated by these extremist ideologies. So I want to just highlight these numbers. And according also to the Zerbi Foundation, more than 56% of the Emiratis are pro the peace treaty, which is quite a big percentage. That means that more than half of the population is pro this peace treaty. And according to the same study, the Zerbi Foundation, more than 59% of the Saudi population support this peace treaty. So that all of these are actual numbers that are based in studies which are completely different than the Qatari Foundation's numbers. Going back to your question, whether the Iranian cause is the only cause, definitely not. Is not the only cause. Okay, the Iranian threat is actually number one threat to the Arab Gulf states since 1979, since the Khomeini revolution. It's not something new. And from the beginning, Israel wasn't the first enemy for the Arab Gulf states, but nobody dares to say that in public. Now the public can say it openly. From ages ago, the Israel was never the first enemy to the Arab Gulf states people, and even to the leaders, because as Amjad said, Israel is not the one that is throwing the missiles on us. Israel is not the one that is arming militias against us. We are against Israel only because of the Palestinians. We don't have a direct conflict between us and Israel. All what we are doing because of the Palestinians, not because of ourselves. So that's the main thing. Our main problem, our main enemy since the late 70s is the Iranian regime since 1979. So that's the first enemy. Going back and to the other circumstances that happened in the region, there are many things that contributed that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not our priority. First of all, the generation has changed. Now the younger generation is thinking about economy, is thinking about employment, are so worried about the first threat to their national security. Is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the first threat to the national security of the Arab Gulf people? No. Okay, this is number one. So the second thing, the events that happened in the region got even more complicated. Like Iran was a threat, as I said, since 79, but it became much more threat now because it almost occupied four Arab states. Yes, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. So its threat is becoming even more now. Now we have an adding problem to Iran, which is Erdogan Turkey. He's as insane as the Iranian regime. He's expanding everywhere, even to Europe. So that is also another threat. So, according, for example, and it varies from country to country regarding the first threat. Like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, definitely the first threat is the Iranian regime. But in other Arab countries, like, for example, UAE or even Egypt, the first threat to them is the Erdogan Turkey, because he's supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, but both of them consider the Iranian regime and the Erdogan Turkey are their main threats. Okay, the third main reason also, after the Arab Spring, most of the Arab states have failed, unfortunately. So now the Arab Gulf states are surrounded with failed states. So accordingly, when you are is surrounded by failed Arab states, that is dangerous to yourself. Because failed states, what does it mean? Failed states means lack of national security, means more militias, means chaos, and since they are your neighbors, so accordingly, and eventually the threat will come to your place, your country. So this is another threat. So what we need.
With your permission, Boaz, Jad spoke about the generational aspect of what's happening in the Middle East towards Israel. You've been reporting during the Arab Spring also from countries like Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and many others. Did you have the feeling that the younger Arab generations are more open to accept and coexist with Israel?
So I'm happy that you remind me that I used to be your big rival. I used to wake up in the morning and see where you are in order to see if you were before me in any country that we used to go with foreign passport. And now luckily we can go with an Israeli passport. And this is amazing. And you agree with me. Now you're asking me about this new generation. And I have to tell you one thing. I'm listening to this panel and I'm thrilled. I am really, how would I say? I will go to sleep tonight a more optimistic man, although it's Corona time, although we still have a lot of problems in the world. Let's be honest. But at the same time, what do we see in this panel? We see Israelis, of course. We know us, but we have also our three friends from the Gulf country, our three new friends, who think we do not share only the same threats when we speak about Iran, but we also we look so much the same, and we also share the same values, and we care about our region, and we care about the children, and we care about our future, and we're going to share this land with the same values and future. And this is something amazing that is happening now in the Middle East. And this panel shows, because when you listen to us, to Professor Zissa, or to myself, or to you, Eldad, and we listen to our friends from the Gulf country, honestly, I mean, sometimes you think that we speak the same, and this is amazing, and this is a big change, and this also answers your question. But let me tell you one thing. The lady before me spoke about those failed states. And I would say two things, I mean, that also brought this agreements, these Abraham agreements that we have today. Of course, it's a process. Of course, it's a process. And with Bahrain, we had negotiations, and with the Emiratis, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say that in the Arab Spring in 2011, and this speaking about those young generation, I mean, they discovered, I mean, the lady spoke about failed states. I would speak about this failure of the state nation in the Arab world. I mean, they tried to create this state nation, and in order to succeed, to put this glue, what was the glue? Anti-Israel, anti-Zionism. And I remember in Tahrir Square, as a journalist, when I had to cover the Tahrir Square, like you, Eldad, and this big Tuesday with like 1 million people. I mean, there were I don't know if 1 million, but there were so many people. And there were two ways to go inside. One way was to come inside this Tahrir Square from the Salafist, and the other one from the young generation. So I preferred to go through the young generation, where you had people with jeans and like us, like in Tel Aviv. And I remember they asked for my passport, and I was very surprised they asked for my passport. And I said, why? And I said, to make sure you're not Israeli, not Israelis allowed. Meaning at the beginning, still, I mean, they were very hostile at the beginning. And then, as the process continued, you remember, we had in Israeli channels, young Egyptians who gave interviews, and now you can see also the difference in the Egyptian streets. So I would say that this crisis, this state nation, and the cause that create, I mean, all those inventions about Israel, the demonization of Israel was, I think, stage number one. Stage number two, as our friend said, it is true that with Iran, the big, even religious crisis and the crisis between the countries and geographically and whatever you want between the Gulf countries and Iran is very old. This is true. But I mean, Iran attacking the Saudis, of course, and with the conflicts with the islands and the intervention in Bahrain, this is something that you can see today. And all of a sudden, they notice that Israel is not the threat at all. But Iran is not the only thing. You need much more than a common enemy. I would say for a common enemy, we would have continued our, how would I say, a certain normalization at night beyond the curtain, not under the line. But I would say that you need something much more deep and much more concrete. And you know, if you permit me, as we've got friends from the Gulf country, I remember in school when I was young, in a French school, we had a debate whether you should call it the Persian Gulf or the Arab Gulf. You remember this, Eldad, like me. So with Israel, maybe soon they'll call it the Arab Gulf again. Who knows?
So, Kaina, there is no doubt that the Palestinians have suffered over the years. Much of this suffering was inflicted upon themselves by themselves. Do you have the feeling that in the Arab world, people are quite fed up with a Palestinian leadership that is incapable of taking any decision and that is willing to do something constructive, not only for the Palestinian people, but also for the whole Middle East?
بالنسبة لعمليات قبول إسرائيل في العالم العربي، عدوي صديقي. تلك إحدى شفرات القبول العربي لإسرائيل، وكلما أمعنت إيران في استعداء دول الخليج خاصة والعربية عامة كان ذلك على حساب إيران، رغم أنها دولة مسلمة ولكنها غير مسالمة، بل أنها دولة أقرب ما تكون للسلوك الصبياني التخريبي العبثي، وهي وأذرعتها في المنطقة متمثلة بحزب الله، الحوثيين، الحشد الشعبي، حماس وغيرهم. العرب لا يحبون إيران بطموحاتها التوسعية واختراقاتها المستمرة لأمنهم وسلامتهم واستقرارهم، لذلك كل خطوة تهدد أمنهم يقابلها قبول بإسرائيل والتعاون معها أمنياً وعسكرياً إذا اقتضى الأمر. لن تتوقف إيران عن التمدد والاختراق الأمني والسياسي، وبالتالي يتنامى كرهها مقابل قبول لإسرائيل في الشارع، مما يعني أنه بجانب موضوعية السلام بصورة عامة أن إسرائيل تكسب أرضية عربية مؤيدة لها بصورة متصاعدة، ما ينفي مع خرافة الاستطلاعات التي تحدثتم عنها سابقاً، التي يعني يبدو أنها موجهة من قبل جماعة الإخوان المسلمين أو ولاية الفقيه لبناء نسبة مئوية غير حقيقية لعدم قبول إسرائيل واستمرار المتاجرة بالقضية الفلسطينية. بالنسبة إلى هل سئم العالم العربي من الفلسطينيين ورغبتهم الظاهرة في استمرار الصراع مع إسرائيل إلى الأبد؟ بحسب المزاج الجماهيري الذي من الممكن تلمسه في مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي وأيضاً من خلال التصريحات من قبل النخب الثقافية العربية بشكل عام والخليجية بشكل خاص، أجد بأن العرب أصبحوا أكثر وعياً بأن القيادات الفلسطينية المتتالية كانت من مصلحتها أن لا ينتهي الصراع الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي، لأنهم يتكسبون من هذه القضية بدءاً من أبو عمار مروراً أو وصولاً إلى محمود عباس. بعد سنوات طويلة استيقظ العرب على حقيقة متاجرة قيادات الفلسطينية بها، وبأن ما جناه العرب من مناصرة القضية الفلسطينية هو صفر كبير، وما جنته القيادة الفلسطينية هي حسابات متضخمة في بنوك أوروبا. لذلك أتمنى من كل الدول الخليجية وضع حد لهذه المهزلة التي تقوم بها القيادات الفلسطينية، وقيام جميع الدول بتوقيع اتفاقيات سلام بشكل عاجل مع إسرائيل.
Before I will ask you a final question about the effects of the American election on the Middle East. Professor Zisser, Sukaina referred to a very interesting term, al-mutajara bil-qadiyya al-Filistiniya, the commerce in the Palestinian problem. Do you see any situation in which the Palestinians finally free themselves from this attitude?
Well, I'm afraid I don't see any breakthrough or change in the future. I mean, the reaction of the Palestinians to the signing of those agreements, instead of joining this peace process, instead of sending the good wishes, all what we heard was sharp and condemnations and attacks against the Gulf states that, well, Egypt was the one that shed, you know, under Anwar Sadat shed its blood for the Palestinian, but the Gulf states did a lot for the Palestinians, and still the reaction was as we have seen. I wouldn't say it's a lost case, but I don't see any change among the Palestinians. They still wait. They still count on the other to solve their problems, and anytime it's not working, the reaction is what we have seen right now.
And the final round, really in 2 sentences, each one of you. What would be the effects of a democratic victory in the US presidential election on the Middle East? Boaz.
Oh, it's easy. It's very easy. We'll make a big U-turn if we were driving a car, unfortunately. Again, I do not think that Mr. Biden is hostile to the Emirate countries or to Israel, but priority will change, and we might go back to the same old paradigm that totally failed. I mean, you have to go again to the Palestinians, and I totally agree with what Professor Zisser just now said, and unfortunately, this is something that we all have to remember. As long as for the Palestinians, it's more important for them, for Israel not to have a state, or for the Jews not to have a state, more important than for them to have a state, then we'll not go forward. And the second thing that is really important, I mean, you know, they always speak about, including Biden and this stuff, two-state solution. 1 second, in order to have two-state solution, you have to have 2 states. You have to have 2 nations. So when did the Palestinians accept the two-state solution? So again, this is why I do believe that we have a very good process, and voting Trump doesn't always mean that you're totally insane. On the contrary, maybe it's because you want peace in the region.
Naajeth? Just a minute, we don't hear you. Just a minute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I see that even though Joe Biden welcomed this peace treaty, but I believe the Mideast peace will lose its momentum if Biden comes to the White House. This is not because of him personally, but because of his surroundings. I personally don't see someone with the mindset of Jared Kushner, like in his loop. Okay, this is one thing. The other thing that I believe, when you say like two-state solution, we have to think, are those people really serious about peace? Since this problem has lasted for 72 years, I believe, frankly and honestly, there will never be peace or two-state solution with this current leadership. Bingo. And the Democrats will come to the box now, number one, and will say there's no peace without talking with the Palestinians. Great, but with this leadership, no way. For two reasons. One, as Sukaina said, those people do not want solution and they're trading off with this conflict. And number two, which is even more important, those leaderships, whether the one in Fatah or the one in Hamas, are driven out of ideologies. One is from leftist communist ideology, which is dominated by Fatah, and one by Islamist ideology with Hamas. Those people do not believe in peace and no two-state solution because they want to wipe out Israel out of the map. This is my opinion. This is what I think of.
Thank you. Eyal?
Well, I think that, people in the region do understand that they can't always rely on the Americans. And I mean, the signing of the peace agreement, I don't think it was only because Trump put the pressure or asked, people in the region, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, even Egypt realized that, well, they should unite, join forces together. And that's what I expect to see if there will be a change in Washington. The shift will be to what we in the region do in front of the Iranian threat, the Turkish challenge, what is going on in Iran, in Yemen, and I guess the United States will be less important than it was under Trump or years before.
Sukaina? We don't hear you. لا نسمعك.
اوكي. طبعا انا غير متخصصه في السياسه بشكل كبير زي دكتوره ناجات، لكن من وجهه نظري لطالما كانت الاداره الامريكيه وانتخاباتها عاملا حاسما ومهما لكلا طرفي الصراع العربي الاسرائيلي، وسيظل ذلك مؤثرا لفتره طويله. وفيما يخص الانتخابات الحاليه فان اسرائيل تعتمد بصوره كبيره على حظوظ الرئيس الحالي، لانه بدأ مع خطوات جريئه وقويه ومؤثره في صراعها مع الفلسطينيين. في حال كانت حظوظ المرشح الديمقراطي أكبر فربما لن يغير ذلك كثيرا في الواقع، ولكن لن يكون الدعم الأمريكي أعتقد بنفس الحيوية والجراءة الحالية، وستكون هناك موازنات أكثر وضوحا فيما يتعلق بالعامل الإيراني. مسيرة تطبيع الدول العربية والإسلامية لن تتوقف بعد تجربة اتفاقية أبرهام، لأن كثيرا من الدول بحاجة للتوافق مع إسرائيل لمواجهة التهديدات الإيرانية التي لن تتوقف وربما تزيد في حال تغيرت القيادة الأمريكية كما يرى البعض.
Thank you. Last but not least, Amjad.
Well, let's say we hope Biden wins because when you experience heaven, you don't want to go back to hell again. And in regards to the Palestinians Authority, I always say even the viruses evolve, but the paddlers on the Palestinian Authority, they do not at all. Everyone is heading towards peace and prosperity, and even the Saudis and the rest of the other Arab Gulf nations. It depends on different path and pathology. And in different timing, it's important for our primary concern to be our national security and the future of our children among the nations, and not to be a hostage to the Palestinian cause on leadership and choices. Our main cause should be the peace and the rejection of extremism and corruption, and therefore to overthrow the West Bank Authority and the destroying the militias in Gaza, Libya, brotherhoods in Yemen, and defeat the occupation and terrorism of the Iranians in Iraq, Lebanon, Ahwaz, and so on. It's important for the region and today, and it is to make a kind of international force to boycott the Palestinian Authority, which has billions and billions and billions of dollars in Switzerland and Austria and South America, and is still stealing the aid to the people of Palestine and starving and arresting the youth and women in Palestine. The message is as follows. creating a bright future, peace, prosperity with the Israeli. There should not be a silence anymore when the militias throw a rocket and kill a soldier or injure a soldier in Nablus by the Palestinian. There shouldn't be a silence in the Arab world. There should be a condemnation, and we should condemn it, because if we go silent and we don't condemn it, the radicalization, the Islamic radicalization, radical groups, they will use it. The Iranians, they will use it. No more silence. We and the Israelis, two normal countries, they want to live in peace and prosperity along each other's, and that's about it. Full stop. The rest doesn't matter. What happened in the past, it doesn't matter. We look to the future, and that's all we care about. It's a point. The whole Abrahamic Accord, it was a point of rebirth, reborn. The nation was reborn, a rebirth moment. Look forward. Stop looking backward.
سيداتي وسادتي، أشكر لكم لمشاركتكم في هذا الحوار المهم، وأتمنى لكل واحد منكم السلام والصحة. Thank you very much for participating in this very important panel discussion, and I wish you all peace and foremost health. Thank you.
Thank you.